one. Joining us now, State Senator Shenandoah Valley, Jill Vogel, Republican. She'll be up for re-election in 2019. She's expected to win another term. Senator Vogel, great to have you on.
It's great to be with you. Good morning. I missed you. I'm so happy to visit.
I miss you too, but I get to hear you every morning when we play your ad, and it's like the best ad we play. It puts me in a good mood. It's like the Sunshine ad.
Oh,
it's really good.
What a nice thing to say. Well, here I am. I heard the ad. I was tickled to hear you play it, and I'm grateful that you guys keep me on, and I'm happy to be with you this morning.
So my son at a baseball game in high school, his high school travel team on Saturday at Virginia Military Institute in Lexington. And then from there, we had a game in James Madison, JMU. So, and then coming home, we drove through the Shenandoah Valley. I mean, I have to say,
drove through my beautiful home. I'm so glad. And you know what? That's the story of my life. Every weekend is like that, with some 101 kid functions. And this weekend, my daughter broke her arm. So while you were cruising up and down the valley, I was sitting in the emergency room for like the 5th time in the last 7 weeks.
How did you break her arm?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Vogel children.
What happened? How did she break her arm?
Keeps it all in perspective. Is
she okay?
Yeah, she's fine. She's fine. It was a bad break, but she's going to live. So, and she didn't have to have surgery. I was really, really, really relieved about that. But
well, that's good. All right, so
the more important point, you were cruising around in my district, in my valley, and hope you saw a Vogel sign or two, and you waved at me as you were cruising past.
Yes, I did. When you don't live there and then you drive through it on a beautiful spring day, it's just such a beautiful area. I mean, it's just breathtaking. I did see a bunch of your signs, but it is a breathtaking area. So I know you would like to be there during the summer, but now you got to go into a special session called by your governor.
Funny. Yeah, but you mentioned that about my signs, because talk about getting people in my district engaged. Talk about calling a special session on your Second Amendment rights, and something that's, I mean, in my district, that's not a close call. And I can't tell you how many people have emailed me and called. In fact, just right before I got on with you, a lady sent me a note and said, thank you so much for, sticking by your position and not wavering on our Second Amendment rights. And please, can I get a yard sign? So there is a silver lining to the governor calling a special session. But I will tell you, I think it's actually quite sad. This is a tragedy. I mean, an absolute tragedy in Virginia Beach. And I think our focus should be on supporting that community and sharing in their anguish and their grief, and not some kind of political knee-jerk response. In other similar situations, other governors did not rush to call a special session. We all know exactly what this is about. We've seen those bills before, and anybody who's educated on the substance of the legislation that's been introduced would tell you, including people in Virginia Beach, including the head of the police department in Virginia Beach, I'm told, who made comments about the fact that there's no legislation, nothing that could have been done to stop this tragedy. This guy didn't buy, 2 guns in 2 weeks. He actually was in a gun-free zone. That reinforces the point that no sticker on a wall that says this is a gun-free zone is going to prevent somebody who is a municipal employee who has a gun from going in and murdering their colleagues. And Virginia Beach already has in place all of these measures that, my colleagues on the other side are saying, must be passed in Virginia. Well, one, they're absolutely an encroachment on your Second Amendment rights. And 2, every single one of them was in place in Virginia Beach. In place. And so if you consider that, that ought to, put people back on their heels a bit and encourage people to take a deep breath and not, respond this way, but instead consider what the community needs, and that's our support. And 2, consider that the legislation that's been proposed, well, guess what? They have a limit on magazines, no silencers, and you couldn't have a gun there. And look what happened.
Jill Vogel, what disappointed me about this is on the surface, Senator Vogel, it appears that the governor has called this, it appears, I'm not going to, I can't read into his soul, right? But it appears that this is done for total political expediency, and it is set up to be a political circus to rouse the Democratic anti-gun base. And
Right.
I'll tell you why. People are still fighting for their life in ICU, so I think it was premature,
Hmm.
but that's just a judgment call. Secondly, what really bothers me about this is the fact that we don't even, the facts of the Virginia Beach shooting aren't even in. We don't know really
Right.
much about the assailant. We just got the email released yesterday or 2 days ago. We were trying to read that. We don't know what his history was, his work, his mental illness history. No one knows anything. So, I mean, wait till that comes out and then call a special session. But look, again, I'm not going to read into the governor's motives. On the surface, though, it sounds like a political sideshow for political expediency at the expense of people that just lost their lives, their loved ones. That doesn't feel good to me. But here's what's even worse. I'm not a fan of Eileen Filler Corn and Caucus of the Corn in the House. I think she's a disastrous minority leader. She can't lead. And right off the bat, she comes out with a statement and says, well, these are things that we're not going to consider and not going to talk about. I thought the idea of having a special session on a topic is to talk about all the issues, get everybody's ideas out. She's already creating parameters. We're not going to talk about this. We're not going to talk about that. The governor's going to veto A, B, and C. So all we want to talk about is our agenda. I mean, what kind of cooperation is that? What is wrong with these people?
Well, and I think that's a misfire. It's totally misguided, and we are misdirecting people's attention on what should be, as you said. I mean, we're not even barely through the funerals and the grief process of Virginia Beach, and you've got people, rushing out to make this political. And I just feel like that's super unfortunate and not what people would expect, and certainly kind of beneath the dignity of how it is that we deal with tragedies in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I mean, good grief, wait just a minute. Take a deep breath before we rush to make this all about politics. And it's not hard to see through this. I mean, if you consider the run that the Democrats have just had, I mean, it has absolutely been devastating. Mm-hmm. And my friends who are Democrats have sat back and scratched their head and watched what happened in the most recent legislative session with mm-hmm. the accusations and just the embarrassing, charade that sort of evolved out of statewide leadership on the Democratic side. So I feel terrible because this just seems to be exploiting a tragedy to change the conversation. And this is a conversation we've always had. Mm-hmm. We've considered really important measures that we know make a difference. Mm-hmm. And I think the legislature should stand by principle and only do what we know does not violate people's constitutional rights and move forward in the ways that are meaningful, but not this, knee-jerk kind of overreaction that's all a political play that I just feel like at a time of mourning and grief is a little premature.
We're chatting with Senator Jill Vogel, Republican from Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, and we're talking about the governor calling a special session of the General Assembly in the summer, and he has a gun grab, I guess, you call it that. Some people are saying it's that, or gun legislation. Basically, he wants restrictions put in place as a result of Virginia Beach. And your majority leader, Tommy Norman, made a statement the other day that just came out, I think, last evening. He said, by calling the General Assembly into session absent a specific plan or package that hasn't already been considered, the governor's actions today are in stark contrast to the deliberative approach employed by then Governor Kane after the murders at Virginia Tech. Disappointingly, this governor has opted for political posturing over solutions. Tommy Norman. That's a pretty strong statement. That's actually stronger than Kirk Cox early in the day, who said that the governor's actions were hasty and suspect. Tommy Norman went a little step further, and it apparently has pissed him off. So, and look, I had...
Well, I have to say, I was shocked, honestly, when I heard in the middle of this conversation, which is about being there for the families and being present in Virginia Beach and, sharing in their grief and having these memorials that somebody actually called for a special session. I actually didn't believe it until I got the press release in my inbox. I thought there's no way that that's what we're talking about this week of all weeks. And
Right.
again, it is in sharp contrast to how we have dealt with other tragedies. And it's true. What Tommy's point is very well taken. Unless you are going to propose a new package of meaningful legislation that hasn't already been considered, why would you incur the cost and expense of having every single member come to Richmond? It's a very, very expensive undertaking. A lot of taxpayer money that goes into that. If you don't have something that you know will either make a meaningful difference or will pass. And I can tell you that some of the things that they've proposed, like banning any magazine over 10 rounds, well, a federal judge in April just struck that down, California's Proposition 63. So, we should just, again, take a deep breath and consider what's viable and what's not, and consider what we just did in the most recent legislative session. Nothing has changed.
Well, it's a political rally for getting out the Democratic base is the way it appears. And look, when I had the speaker on earlier, I said, has anybody called you? Like, have you talked to Dick Saslow, the Senate Minority Leader? Has Eileen called you? Eileen Filler-Corn, the House of Delegates Minority Leader. Has David Marston called you? Right, David, one of the big proponents on the Democratic side of certain gun restrictions. Has any leadership on the other party called you up and said, "Hey, here are some of ideas. Let's get together on a conference call and see if we can talk about some things"? No, he didn't get a call from anybody. They're not going to call him because they don't want to compromise. They want a political event and a circus and a sideshow, and that's why they're calling it. Meantime, I'd like to call a special session on why don't they give Justin Fairfax, his accusers, the hearing they want, that the Speaker of the House has tried to do. He's given Eileen Filler-Corn every opportunity, even up to the end, saying, you basically set it up. You tell me who you want there. I'll sign it. She says no, right? So why don't they do that instead of this?
Yeah.
It's sick.
Well, the hypocrisy is just, it's hard to get your arms around. And I am super glad that you raised this, because when you're in the middle of it during session, it's easy to lose perspective because you're there and you're under enormous pressure to get your bills done, and things are moving at 1,000 miles an hour, and you're kind of in the bubble. But to come back home to your district and hear people's reactions, and it's not just Republicans, it's Republicans and Democrats and independents and women who are appalled, absolutely appalled at the hubris of a statewide elected official to come out and say very unkind things about women who seem quite credible and who simply ask for an opportunity to be heard. So certainly this is an extraordinary opportunity. If the Democrats said that they were not going to show up and listen to the women who asked, all they made was a request that they have the opportunity to testify and that they do it before Republicans and Democrats. Well, here we are. If we're going to have a special session and we're going to have Republicans and Democrats and everybody convened, then absolutely that is an appropriate opportunity to do what these women asked for back during session and have asked for during the summer, and that is give them an opportunity to be heard. Because that isn't about grandstanding or political posturing. That is real-world, legitimate, concerns that have been raised that should shock the conscience of anybody. And the lieutenant governor's response, that was, to attempt to say really, unkind and really gross things and not be very gracious about this, made it even worse. And so, in that regard, I say, yeah, enough with the posturing and the rally on, kind of exploiting a tragedy, but let's actually deal with something that's absolutely right in front of us that they want to, pretend literally didn't happen. How's that even possible? I mean, you've got a statewide elected official who couldn't come to the party's big fundraiser, and it's such a glaring issue that, Democrats outside of Virginia can't come to Virginia because of all the controversy and embarrassment. And yet, we're going to ignore that, and we're going to go back and try to relitigate a whole series of issues that were thoroughly litigated during session and, introduce legislation that is either going to be overturned by a court or meaningless. Mm-hmm. And yet we won't address something as critical as these allegations. It absolutely kills me and an impact on the impression women have of the women in the legislature on the other side, who one would expect would, at a minimum, act with dignity and respect for the accusers.
Caucus of the Corn is where hypocrisy meets incompetence. That's all I can say. And for Kirk Coxon, the hearing that he wanted, Senator, and you're so right, he also wanted Justice Fairfax to get due process. He could defend himself. And so it was the best thing for all. They rejected it. And now I told this to somebody I told this to Bobby Scott. I had him on earlier. As a result of this, Justin Fairfax is going to run for governor on the Democratic side, and they're going to have to deal with that. He is going to run for governor, and he's going to start out with about 35% backing, because there's a lot of people that think he was accused and didn't get due process. So they're going to have to deal with him running for governor, and he could win and be at the top of their ticket in 2021, all because they wouldn't do the right thing, and they turned that in. Eileen Filler-Corn made a decision based on what is best for her caucus and politics, had nothing to do with the right thing to do. And she's doing the same thing with this General Assembly in putting out caveats about what we can't talk about. I mean, that's like saying, we're going to have an open meeting and discuss all your problems and try to get them resolved, but here are the 5 things we're not going to do. What the hell kind of meeting is that? I mean, that's
right.
Basically, you want to just come in and dictate to me what you want done, and then you have no dialogue, you have no conversation. And that's what she's doing again.
It just speaks to the
she's incompetent,
politically charged nature of this discussion, and it isn't real, and it isn't about being collaborative and considering new proposals or new solutions or new funding sources for some of the critical community needs that actually would have an impact on addressing some of the issues that cause people to do what this shooter did. But no, that's not what the conversation is going to be about, and they're not interested in anybody's ideas except for saying very politically inflammatory things that will rally a group of people. And I just feel like that's very unfortunate. It's not the Virginia way. It's not the legislature that I joined when I was first elected, where people were very solicitous of one another's views, very open and courteous, and it wasn't all about, just a partisan grandstanding on every single issue. And certainly, I can't imagine that in an environment where the entire national media descended on your state, and there were, crushing amounts of pressure on the legislature to provide due process and give women a hearing. I can't imagine that you would, attempt to drown that out with something that's, clearly as political and an effort to exploit a real tragedy. I mean, let's talk about, again, what's right in front of us. And I just feel like it's a big disappointment, and it has let down a lot of women, and frankly, I think a lot of Democrats. I've talked to a lot of people who've been quite disappointed by how this was handled. And as you pointed out, somebody has to deal with this eventually. So whether it's now and we dispose of this matter and give people an opportunity to be heard and move forward, or whether it's when the statewide nominee is now an accused. I can't fathom a scenario where it's worse. So
he's going to run for governor.
Reasons, I regret that it's played out this way.
Fairfax is going to run for governor, and he's going to be one of the leading candidates, and he could very well be the nominee. And he's going to have a platform. And the platform is, I was falsely accused. I didn't get due process. Nobody came forward a hearing, and I got screwed. And that's going to be, I tell you what, Jill, that's going to be his platform. And don't dismiss it. I got to go. John Fredericks Radio Network. Yep. Great to have you, Jill Vogel. Senator, thanks for being with us.